Everyone, and welcome to my presentation on the Civil Rights and Liberties discussion board. So the topics being discussed today are freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, search and seizure, due process of law, 9th and 10th Amendment, equal protection, and discrimination. So the first concept is freedom of religion, which is the First Amendment, which protects both the freedom of exercise of religion and the prohibition against government establishing a religion, like making a religion for everyone to follow. Misconception number one is that people think it only protects Christianity and major religions. But in reality, it protects all faiths and the right to have no religion at all. Misconception number two is some people believe freedom of religion means religion can be promoted in public schools by teachers or the government, but the government is not allowed to endorse religion. Freedom of speech protects individuals from government restrictions on most forms of expression, with limited exceptions, like you can't incite threats, obscenity, like cussing and just yelling out hate speech. Misconception number one is that most people think freedom of speech means you can say anything anywhere, but some places enforce rules that you can't just say whatever you want. Misconception number two is that some people assume it protects speech from criticism, but in reality, anyone can disagree or push back or criticize your statements. Freedom of the press is the right to publish information, including criticism of the government without censorship and restraint, prior restraint, unless it's something where national security or basic just slander and stuff like that. Misconception number one is that people think it only applies to professional journalists or large news outlets, but it applies to everyone, including independent publishers or bloggers. Misconception number two is that some believe the government must give access to journalists to access all the information, but it doesn't affect publishing of anything really, but it does not guarantee access to classified or private data from the government. Search and seizure protects people from unreasonable searches, so they can't just search you because they want to search you. They have to have probable cause, or generally they need a warrant. So if they're trying to search your house, most of the time they'll need a warrant unless you give them consent first. Misconception number one is that people think they always need a warrant, but in reality they don't. If you give them consent, you have a weapon in plain view, or if there's exigent circumstances where if they think someone's gonna die, then they can just come in. Misconception number two is that the Fourth Amendment, which is search and seizure, they believe it only protects the home, but it's extended to pretty much anything you own, cars, phones, personal effects, and stuff like that. Due process of the law basically requires fair and legal procedures from the government before they can deprive you of life, liberty, and property. basically they have to follow certain rules to just like before they can charge you with anything. Misconception number 1 is that most people think it only applies to like criminal trials, but it applies to civil cases and administrative hearings as well. Misconception number 2 is that some people assume due process means like a full trial, but sometimes is like a notice to be heard, like an opportunity to be heard, like in hearings. The 9th Amendment is listing certain rights in the Constitution does not mean people lack like other fundamental rights. Misconception number 1 is that people believe the 9th Amendment right gives rights. It doesn't grant new rights, but it recognizes the unenumerated rights that already exist. So like just because you're different race, different gender, you still have the same rights as everyone else. Misconception number 2 is that others assume it's irrelevant or never used. But it has a lot of different interpretations of like privacy and liberty rights. Now, the 10th Amendment, like powers not delegated to the federal government aren't prohibited to the states or are reserved to the states and the people. It's like a foundation of federalism. Now, misconception number 1 is that many assume states can do anything under the 10th Amendment, but the state power is still limited by the Constitution. Misconception number 2 is that some people believe that individuals can opt out of federal laws they don't like, but in reality, like valid federal laws override state or personal objections. So, like certain federal laws, you can't just not follow because you don't want to. Equal protection states that people must be treated equally and can't like unjustly discriminate between individuals or groups, and that everyone is treated the same under the law. Misconception number 1 is that some people think that everyone must be treated the same, but some laws allow like reasonable distinctions, like age limits for driving or voting, age limits for drinking. Like just because you're equal doesn't mean you have all the same rights as someone who is of legal age, if that makes sense. Misconception number 2 is people think it only protects like racial minorities, but it applies broadly to all groups and classifications like gender, citizenship, or age. And then lastly, discrimination is unfair or prejudicial treatment based on different things like race, sex, religion, disability, or age. This law, the law of discrimination, prohibits many forms of employment discrimination, housing, and education. So basically, if you're disabled, they can't not hire you just because you're disabled. Or they can't not hire you because you're African American or you're Asian. Misconception number 1 is that some people think all unequal treatment is illegal discrimination. However, only treatment based on protected characteristics in certain contexts are unlawful. Misconception number 2 is that others assume discrimination must be intentional, but some cases show like policies that can be discriminatory, even with the intent if they unfairly harm certain groups. So again, like if they made rules or like laws, like policies that are meant for, say, abled people and affect the disabled people. And that is my presentation. Thank you.